Welcome, everyone, to the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. I am your host, Sami Kinnison, along with my co-host, Angela Belford. I think Josh made a big deal between guest and host, but, we're all hosts here. So happy to have a conversation with you today. We're going to be starting a new series. A couple of episodes, we're going to talk through this idea of syndrome or superpower. We've got a couple of different topics teed up to debate, discuss, go back and forth. Angela, tell us a little bit more about the series and what you hope people get from it.
Well, what kind of started this is that many years ago, I say diagnosed, it's a little bit informally, but it was by someone who in their previous job was responsible for diagnosing people with ADHD. So just to be clear, I didn't go to a psychologist, but I went with there was someone that was in a situation with me and they diagnosed me with ADHD. And at the time, I thought they were kind of teasing me like, oh my gosh, Angela, you have ADHD or ADD. Back then, that's what we called it. And then a year or so later, someone was explaining that one of the hallmarks of ADD is this ability to hyperfocus, which I thought was what proved that I didn't have it. Anyways, over the last probably 12, 14, 15 years, I have come to see that ADD is not a disorder. I'm only labeled with a disorder because I live in an industrialized agrarian society that believes in showing up every day and sitting at a desk and doing the thing you do. And it is absolutely my superpower. So that is a disorder that I think is garbage. And I'm not saying that it's not real. It is absolutely understanding how your brain works is important. And we're actually going to talk about that next episode. But that is how this kind of got started. And then I hear a lot of people talking about imposter syndrome. And I'm just like, there is some really, there's some interesting things. Today, we're actually going to talk about imposter syndrome. And I saw a couple of articles that said it's actually your superpower. And I'm like, yes, this is what I've been saying. And then the third episode we're going to do is perfectionism. And ironically, people don't treat this as a disorder or a syndrome. And yet I believe it is mostly not a superpower. I believe it mostly should be considered a syndrome or a disorder because it can wreak havoc on your life, which I guess the others can too. So that's kind of what got us started. That's the three parts that we're going to talk about is imposter syndrome, ADD, and perfectionism. Spoiler alert, I think perfectionism is the disorder, not the superpower.
We'll go ahead and just, reveal the whole series in the first intro of it, but no big deal. We'll just...
But now they can hear why.
That's true. This is also speaking techniques. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. Here we go.
It does work.
So starting with imposter syndrome, what is it? It's a good place to start with what is it that we're talking about?
Yes. So imposter syndrome is feeling like you're faking it at work and that somebody will find out. And the idea is that most of us don't feel good. And they used to say that this was something that women had. So some of the early research, this research actually dates back into the 70s. And the early research on imposter syndrome was really identified this among women specifically. And perhaps with our societal norms, I think it is a little more common how women are socialized in our Western culture. However, it is now they're finding that there are sometimes that men have this as well. So the idea of fake it till you make it, except it's when you fake it till you make it, but you don't want anybody to know that you're faking it. That's how I would describe it. How would you describe it? We've talked about it.
I think that there's this idea that maybe you are out of place, in over your head. This, who am I to be in this master's program, in this, particular job, managing people? There's an element where you not that you have to like think less of yourself whenever you're facing imposter syndrome, but you don't feel like you fit into the role that you are filling at that moment. Like, golly, I'm so, and especially in comparison to others, I think the imposter syndrome is definitely something that invites us to compare ourselves to where other people are. And so when you're looking at the people to your left and right, you're like, God, they must know exactly what they're doing. They have everything figured out and put together, when really they may be feeling the exact same way as you. And you just wouldn't know it because everybody's just doing it. I think it's definitely more of an internal battle than anything else. Like, you're out looking at somebody, you may have no idea that they are struggling with doubts and insecurities within themselves because they're going to be doing the work and they're just going to fake it and keep going and be like, well, I can make it happen. And I think that sometimes it's fine to do that. There is an element where it pushes you to grow because if you only do the things that you know that you for sure can handle and do, you aren't pushing yourself. You're not actually growing. And so sometimes it does involve, and you need to reach farther than yourself, take on new tasks. I think where imposter syndrome steps in versus just pushing yourself is the feeling, it's the insecurities that come with it. It's the, who am I to be here? I didn't, maybe I didn't earn this. Maybe people are just pitying me. They're not actually recognizing good work. I don't know. There's different elements like that I think come into play versus just, well, I'm doing something new and I'm approaching a new challenge and I'm going to just take the next step and keep on going. There's a nuance.
Absolutely. 100%. I think that, and we'll get into like why it's good to have, and how you can use it to your benefit. Of course, everything is an indicator light for me. I love using that and that metaphor. And so from my perspective, if you do have imposter syndrome that feels debilitating, that feels like it is holding you back, it could be an indicator of some underlying limiting beliefs that you have. So what that might look like is, and the statistics, at least historically, have been pretty brutal with looking at men and women that are willing to apply for jobs. And so typically women will apply for jobs that they know that they're 100% qualified for. And I think the statistic is men only need to be like 60 to 70% qualified, and they will go after those jobs. So in those scenarios, then absolutely imposter syndrome can hold you back in a career path, that you're not going after those jobs that you're mostly qualified for. But as a indicator light of what's going on with your, emotional regulation and health and mental stability, it could be telling you that you have some limiting beliefs about whether or not you trust yourself and whether or not you think you have what it takes. And those are two of the beliefs that in my new book I'll be unpacking kind of a lot. But those two beliefs, if you have episodes in your past that seem to provide you with a lot of evidence that you can't trust yourself or that you don't have what it takes, then I think that is how you can get started in addressing imposter syndrome, because I can tell you, as a positive thinking evangelist, just thinking more positively does not actually solve the problem. It does not actually just just fake it till you make it. Yes, to a degree, but if you are still at a point where you're debilitated by that, then you may want to dig in and kind of try to understand what that underlying belief is with that.
Absolutely. I feel like I don't know enough medical things to make this metaphor, but we're going to try it anyway. Sometimes there's an element where even the positive thinking can address a symptom that's happening. Like if you've got, your finger is bleeding and you need to put a Band-Aid on it. Put a Band-Aid on your finger. Like do the things you have to do today. If you have to just sort of put on a fake smile and make it through, put on a fake smile and make it through. But if you don't address the fact that the cut on your finger is not healing and maybe you need stitches and maybe you need to, like, I don't know, this isn't a deep enough metaphor, but there's, the underlying cause, it's just going to keep coming back up. If you work figuring out those limiting beliefs that are inside that, so that tomorrow maybe it's not as hard to fake it and to put on a smile and to just make it happen. I don't know. My metaphor is not working out well here, but
that's okay. No. I think it absolutely is. I think that you're absolutely right. The metaphor that I've recently thought about in terms of how these limiting beliefs kind of self-generate additional negative thoughts is thinking through, and I know I date myself when I talk about the gremlins. So anybody of a certain age, which I think a lot of our listening audience is of a certain age. Did you almost
just call them congregation? I caught that. You almost said congregation. A lot of our congra audience. So anyway, a lot of our audience, the gremlins, the idea. Keep it going.
Yeah, guess who else has ADD? Hope everybody anyway, I tell people I don't suffer from ADD. I enjoy every minute of it. Hope you guys do as well. The thing is, most of our audience, I think, can relate to this, and if not, you can Google it. But the thing with gremlins is that if you get them wet, they replicate. They just spontaneously replicate. The thing is that the original gremlin was sweet and kind, and the ones that replicated then became not so sweet and kind. And so when I've thought about, like, when I try to replace negative beliefs, but I don't get to the core issue of, like, healing the deep work that I need to do and really completing that emotional cycle from that, I think about these gremlins and how they just, like, spontaneously keep erupting. And that's how thoughts work in my head, is that I can, like, oh, I'm going to think a positive thought. But when I wake up at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, without my knowledge, thoughts are going to pop in my head that are not so helpful. Have you seen The Gremlins, Sammy?
I actually haven't seen Gremlins.
I would make you watch it, except it gets really dark at some point. It starts out really sweet and then it gets really dark. Don't feed them after midnight. Anyway, those are some of the downsides and maybe how you can begin to address imposter syndrome. But we say our whole premise of this episode is that it is a superpower. So why don't we talk about some of the upsides of imposter syndrome? Sammy, you kind of touched on them. So you want to get us started?
I think one of the upsides I wanted to talk about first is that I think it can really make you more empathetic for other people. I think if you are in a situation where you're, not the imposter, not feeling that, but you have a group of people around you, consider that anybody might be facing imposter syndrome-like feelings. What can you do to help ease their concerns and ease their worries? Are there small things? I'm not saying you have to go way out of your way to tend to everybody's potential insecurities. And also, there are times where we can approach things in a slightly different way to just hold space and be gentle, that somebody may not be 100% sure that this is the right place for them. Whether it's a new role, an education program, you're a teacher, you're mentoring someone. I don't know. I think that being able to understand it, you can be more empathetic than other people facing this.
Yeah, I've seen you show empathy for this space, especially around becoming a new wife and a new mom over the last 6 to 7 years. So, and then you've passed it on. So talk about how you kind of, because it's not just in the workplace.
That is true. I think that even this idea of parenthood and feeling like a good parent at different times, what actually is a good parent? We get to have whole long conversations that it's such a nebulous idea, but everybody is genuinely, I believe everyone is genuinely doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. And if you can tell yourself that and tell yourself, I am doing the best that I can with the tools that I have, you're in the right spot. You are exactly where you need to be. And I don't know, lending people that encouragement, lending people that gentleness. Somebody mentioned that to me recently, that it sounded like I had learned a lot about how to be gentle with myself. And I really think that that's accurate. So I keep coming back to that phrase because it's true. And I don't know, the empathy and gentleness required in when you're facing things that you don't know how to do. When you have a baby and you leave the hospital, there is no instruction manual. Nobody says, like, here's exactly how to take care of it. Frankly, it's quite terrifying, the fact that they just send you home after having a baby and say, great, keep it alive for the next 18 years. Go on. Like,
good luck with that.
And you're like, WTF, how am I supposed to do this? Like, what's happening? Anyway, there's so much of it that's trial and error, that's learning. And you definitely face this. Like, I am like, it's different than keeping a pet alive. I know people talk about pets and kids are kind of the same, but frankly, like a goldfish, I was not very good at keeping goldfish alive. But the stakes are much higher with 2 children to keep them alive. And I don't know, it's okay to be an imposter at times. Even that, it's okay to not know what you're doing. And you know what? I bet it'll be fine. I also remind myself, if anybody needs this encouragement in parenting, there is no single decision or moment that will make or break my children. It just won't. So if I decide today that I really need them to watch an extra hour of TV so that I can sit and not have to think really hard, and it's an extra hour of screen time, you know what? I bet that 1 hour of screen time will not turn them into a serial killer. There you go. Like, good enough. Sometimes that's what it has to be. No single decision will make or break anything. But I think that's also true. Well, not no single decision. Most generally, you could assume that there's not a single decision you would make. And I think that's kind of true in work as well. There's a lot of things that we have to do that if you're struggling to make any decision, make a decision, because it's probably not going to be life or death in that one decision. On the flip side and the encouraging side, it is a series of small decisions that makes us greater. So make a series of small decisions that maybe make you a little bit greater.
Love that. I think one of the upsides of imposter syndrome is actually the idea that it could be a sign that you don't fit in. And that's not always bad, right? Because if you think about the idea of disruptors and people that change the world, they're the exceptions to the rule. Like, it's not the people that are like accepting status quo that are going to change the world. It's the people that are like, this isn't right. And so it could be a sign to you that you really shouldn't be in this place. And so you may need to cultivate other talents. Some of the research says that imposter syndrome often shows up if you have taken kind of a non-traditional education path. I've seen friends of mine struggle if they didn't complete their college degree. One of them was 3 hours short. And it haunted him for 20 years that he did not complete that 3 hours. And so that, like, to me, that's the indicator light. Then go figure out how to fix it. Right. But it also could be that, like, oh, wow, I didn't really excel in this path, and I'm going to take this non-traditional path and go into construction or go into one of the trades or something, because school wasn't really my gig. And so it doesn't have to be it can sometimes be okay that you don't fit in with everyone else.
I, in my previous job, had some coworkers who had not completed their college degree. And I remember having a conversation with one, and she described herself just as stuck in her job because she didn't have a college degree. How could she go out and get another job? And she just was so fortunate that she would have this job. But even though it wasn't something that she loved to do, and even though it wasn't fulfilling her and frustrating her in different ways, she's like, I have to stay here because no college degree. I'm just lucky that somebody chose me. And I a lot of times was like, I don't get it. There are a lot of people without college degrees that have so much experience. And she had been working in this job for like 8 to 10 years. She knew her stuff. It's like, if you don't want to do this, you can transfer these skills. I don't know. I agree. I think that there are things that sometimes we're holding ourselves back. We're telling ourselves nobody would want me because I don't have this thing, or nobody, I wouldn't, even on the opposite, I wouldn't fit in here because of XYZ reason.
Mm-hmm.
Says who? You don't know until you try.
Well, and the other thing is that I got my master's degree when you turned 16, or maybe it's 2011, 2010 was. So yeah, you turned 16. And I did that because before that, I was having so many kids that I wanted them to be able to drive themselves before I could manage. And I took one class at a time. I have a friend that's a single mom, and after her divorce, she took one class at a time. And it's, especially in today's time, like, don't let that be the thing that holds you back, because I know somebody that just re-enrolled in community college, and you could make 5 payments of $200. They're going to take 2 classes this semester. And so, like, go find out what it takes, because what if you could take one class at a time and they let you make a payment plan? So the amount of money that you spend eating out in a month could begin to work towards your college degree. And I'm not saying you have to have a college degree. I'm saying if that's the thing,
right?
If that's the thing that makes you feel like you don't belong, fix it.
And I, thinking back to a different coworker at the same job, she did do that. She was a single mom, and she worked extra hard to get her college degree. And she gets to the end of her college degree. She was like, this is it? Like, what? Like, I thought I was missing out on this big grand thing. I thought I was going to learn all of these big things. I have learned more in the school of life than I learned in some of my college classes. So it made me laugh a little bit. Not to say that it's not worth it, but there are also things where she was undervaluing herself and just the experiences that she had because she didn't have an expensive piece of paper on the wall. Sometimes the expensive piece of paper on the wall doesn't actually mean that much. I'll tell you, there are 20-somethings who get that very expensive piece of paper that have practically no skills. And then you can also have a lot of skills and not have that one, credential, so to speak. So taking it back to imposter syndrome, there's an element that you can use it as like you said, an indicator light of when you are growing. Maybe you're in a different position. I also think that we have this idea that we are supposed to be comfortable all the time. And I don't think that that's true. There's the cutesy graphic that's like, here's your comfort zone. It's big circle. And then there's a circle separate from that. And it says, this is where the magic happens, outside your comfort zone. Because being outside of your comfort zone is where you grow and stretch and change. And that's where the magic happens.
It is where the magic happens, which brings me to at least one more thing of what imposter syndrome, how it can be a positive, is that it can be a signal for ambition and competence. And so this article that I was reading, which we should quote who the article is, Tyler Cohen, published this on Bloomberg. But one of his ideas was that the people that experience imposter syndrome, typically the way they respond is they work hard and to gain the skills that they need so that they can achieve what they need to, and that they aren't actually found out. Now, that obviously everything can be taken to the extreme, but he looks for this in the interview process. If somebody admits to that they feel like they have a little bit of imposter syndrome, because he's like, that's good. That means that you want to be better and that you want to be competent, because we've all met the guy who is in the meeting, who acts like he knows everything and acts like he's, God's gift to creation. And he actually doesn't work very hard. And he actually doesn't, let me say actually 7,000 more times, he doesn't really contribute. the value, and he's stealing other people's ideas and all of those things. And I'm sorry to use that masculine term, but we see that more often in these like overconfident males. And so the imposter syndrome also kind of can use it to generate like I'm going to do some extra research. I'm going to do some extra studying. I'm going to just give a little extra.
Yeah, I think that there's a term, and I can't remember what it is. I was trying to Google it real fast, but the phenomenon that when you know enough to know that you don't know enough, and then there are people who don't know enough to know that they don't know enough. And that is very annoying. And so when you're on the first side of things, when you know enough about a topic to know that there's so much more to know about it, you actually are ahead of average. You may not feel like it. You may not be the leading expert on this subject, but you can be above average on something, even if you don't know everything about it. Whereas it's very annoying to have to work with the people who think that they know everything about something, but it's very obvious that they do not. Yeah.
I have, I mean, not to bring up the master's degree again, but it's been 12 years now almost that I've had this master's in internet marketing. And of course, the paper didn't give me the skills that I have. I find myself being in that first camp where I know what I don't know. And it's sometimes very refreshing to be with somebody who asks questions. And I call it the cocktail party consulting. You know, like, what do you know so well that if you're standing around at a cocktail party that you would just chat about your expertise, like chat about this thing that you know about? And I will meet people that will be like, I don't know the first thing about this, whatever, or how, I don't even know how I should handle that. And I just go blah, 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 blah. And not only do I know that, but I've helped 12 other businesses do exactly that thing. And I'll be like, oh, crap, I've forgotten how far I've come. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh. Which, speaking of how far you've come, there is a concept that will help you, I think, as a great antidote for imposter syndrome. And there's a book called Gap versus Gain. You can actually Google Gap versus Gain, and I'll put a link to it in there. You don't even have to actually read the book. I probably shouldn't say that, but he's prolific on the internet. And the concept is this, that when we set a goal for like the ideal life, when we get to an intermediate goal, we still are very far away from that horizon. And most of us will never achieve ideal life because we are still alive. We are still growing and evolving. And so, but if we are always looking at the gap of where we are between now and the ideal life, then we'll be frustrated and annoyed and feel like we'll never get there. And it's discouraging. And he contrasts that with recognizing the gain. And that is when you hit an intermediate goal or you hit a new level and you look back on where you started and you see how far you've come, and you see and you assess how many obstacles you've overcome to get where you are today, and using that as fuel and momentum and energy to get to your next thing. It's like, oh, wow, think about, and I do this with clients all the time. I make them talk to their past self, their 18-year-old you. What would 18-year-old you think about what you're doing? Would they be impressed with what you're doing? Would they be like surprised that you've come so far? Now and again, your 18-year-old you says your job is super boring and it's dumb that you put up with all of this nonsense. Maybe you should listen to your 18-year-old you from that perspective. But anyway, it's an opportunity for you to see how far you've come. And it really can be a fantastic antidote to the imposter syndrome, to be like, okay, I've learned all these things. I trust myself to learn. I trust myself to work hard. I know that I have what it takes to work and do whatever it takes. I can set some impossibly hard goals sometimes because I trust that if I decide that I really want something, I will do whatever it takes to get there. Now that has gone to my detriment from time to time. But with that core belief of if you're willing to do whatever it takes, you can do many things. I won't say anything because I'm not going after to be president of the United States and I'm not going to go be an NBA basketball player. But many other goals that are realistic that I set just have to have that core belief. Are you willing to do whatever it takes, learn whatever you need to get where you need to go?
I like it. I want to take us maybe back a step to build some, I don't know, empathy within ourselves. Is there a time where you have felt imposter syndrome? Tell me about a time within your life where you have faced this.
This week, last week. I am writing, as y'all know that have been on the podcast. Nope, I'm not writing. I'm in the edit phase of a second book. If you have listened to my friend Gwen Rockwood, last month we talked a lot about that. And there's an element of that where maybe that isn't imposter syndrome. Maybe that is just like feeling like while I'm willing to do whatever it takes, I can't always figure out what it is going to take to get there and to finish and to make it coherent and make it lovely. So that is a particular time. The other time is sometimes people will ask me to speak like at a conference or a workshop about a topic. And when they select the topic for me, I will sometimes be like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. But then I just think, well, are you willing to put in the time? Because that's really the bottom line. I had a keynote speech that I agreed to do. Actually, it's, I think, episode somewhere back last April, where I did a keynote speech and I only had 2 weeks notice. And I spent like 15 to 20 hours on that keynote trying to make sure, because I had an idea for the topic, but I really wanted it to kind of be the basis. And so that would probably be the other time, is if somebody else selects the topic when I have to speak. What about you, Sammy? When do you feel imposter syndrome?
I think the time that comes up, immediately in my brain is hosting the first TEDx event that I did. I remember I was so eager to plan an event. The reason I got into TEDx events was because my senior year of college, I had been a regional president of the sorority. I planned our regional convention. Then I had my wedding that I planned. I had all of these projects. And I was like, this fall, I'm going to get really bored. I'm not going to have anything to do. I should figure out what it takes to plan a TEDx event. So I did. I figured out what it took, and I went into planning it. There are a lot of mistakes that I made along the way, a lot of things that I learned. And I remember there were several times where people just expected a lot of me, and they thought that I was, the TEDx events are all volunteer. You cannot get paid to host a TEDx event. And there were times where people were like, I don't understand why this was done this way and why you're not doing this better. I was like, I'm a volunteer. I'm 22 years old. I have never done this before, but thanks for assuming that I am like deep professional, been in the community, been doing this for a long time. And I have not. And I don't know what you want from me besides these things that I have to offer. And even there are times where I think back to that first TEDx event, and there are still a couple of regrets is not the right word, but kind of some small things that do haunt me that I wish I could have been able to do better. And also, I did the best that I could with the tools that I had at the time. Now that I have done several of them, I'm like, oh, no big deal. I feel really great about it. And there was a part where, standing on stage for the introduction there near the beginning, I'm like, who am I to think that I can host this event? Like on the day of, I still was thinking, who do I think I am that I can just host TEDx events? And apparently you can just host TEDx events and just make it happen. So that's some time.
So can I just reiterate that? So for those of you that, for everybody in the back, did you just say that you hosted your first TEDx event when you were 22?
Yeah, I did.
Less than a year out of college?
I think it was a year and like 4 months out of college.
Gosh, my bad. Less than 2 years out of college.
Yeah.
What's so funny about that is that your day job, when you were hosting the TEDx event, what was your day job?
I was a receptionist.
So I remember the entertainment value of you had this job that kind of in the organization you were in was like, definitely low man on the totem pole, definitely like did not exactly commandeer a lot of respect. And then you walked out of that scenario and you were like running the alumni association for your sorority. You were formed immediate past president. So they all thought you were a really big deal. And you're doing this TEDx event. And I just remember the contrast of that identity of who you were and what's cool is that from my perspective, doing the TEDx event kept you grounded in, no, this is who I am. I'm my starting position. And I was always impressed that you were willing to start. Yes, I have a double major. Yes, I have a degree. And yes, this will be, they even asked you in the interview, you're overqualified. And you're like, yes, but when the next position comes open, I'll already be here, which I thought took amazing amount of humility for you to do that and paid off. Did very
Within
well.
5 months, I was informed that I was going to be promoted. Not asked. I was told, hey, Monday, your desk is moving over here and you're going to do this new job because we need help with that. Like, okay, sounds great.
Didn't your boss even say, remember when you told me you were already here? We're really glad you're already here. Something like that. Maybe he didn't remember that he said that.
No, what's funny is that it wasn't even my boss who moved me.
Oh.
It was a different department head who said, you have too much skill to be sitting behind the reception desk. Like, we need to move you. You need to come over here. And I was
That's
like,
hilarious.
okay. Yeah,
Okay.
sometimes getting your foot in the door is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we could do a whole thing on reverse imposter syndrome where people think that jobs are beneath them. Oh, and it's like sometimes they are beneath you. And sometimes if it's a great organization, maybe you need to learn. Anyway, that's a whole different episode.
I do think that, that sort of feels like it's similar, tangentially related to the I don't know enough to know that I don't know enough.
Yes.
To that person. I will say I don't personally have a lot of tolerance for people who say that that's not my job, that job's beneath me. I get pretty frustrated pretty quickly on a team when people aren't willing to do all the work. I don't know. I think it's because I'm willing to do all the work, even if that means within my job, maybe I need to scrub some toilets. Maybe I need to organize a meeting. Maybe I need to order lunch. Maybe I need to lead the meeting. I
like to think that's because you're an owner's kid, because your parents owning a business your entire life. There's no such thing as not my job.
Right. And I even it's my job to take care of the business assets, whether the asset is a conference room that needs to be cleaned up or how I'm billing my time to take, financially. Yeah, it all makes sense. You take care of the things that need to be taken care of. And people notice. People notice when you're the one willing to stay behind and clean up trash or do whatever.
Yes. And there is an element of everything is a nuance and a balance of like knowing because I see business owners that are afraid to hire some help because they are like, well, no. I'm like, well, if your time is more valuable spent billing, then absolutely hire a receptionist or hire the help that you need. There were many years that I've had an executive assistant that extended my ability and capacity dramatically. So.
Okay, so to kind of start our descent, landing the plane, we'll recap a little bit. Imposter syndrome, not a syndrome, a superpower. While there are some negative sides and negative elements of it, and it can be taken to an extreme that can be really debilitating. In mild levels, moderate form, it can also help push us. It can make us more empathetic. It can help us recognize our ambition, or it can also help us recognize when maybe we don't need to be in this particular room or space. What takeaway, Angela, would you like people to walk away with? If people walked away with one thing, what would you want it to be?
I am going to say that probably most people would easily recognize imposter syndrome in a category room of fear. It feels a lot like fear. Whether that is feeling a fear of failure, a fear of success, people can kind of recognize that. And what I would say is fear isn't fatal. Let's be all cliche about it. It's not even bad. Fear can actually just be a motivator. So when you feel that imposter syndrome or that fear, I hope that people take away, do not ignore it. Do not just fake it till you make it. Get yourself through whatever situation, survive the moment, and then dig in and look intentionally at how that fear is trying to communicate something to you, that imposter syndrome that you're feeling, and just accept that there's something that your brain, your body, however you want to think about it, is trying to tell you, and what you can do with that situation. And use it to your advantage. It can be a tool. It can drive you. Don't let it just automatically mean I should stop. That's my takeaway.
I love it. That's beautiful. Thanks everyone for listening to season 2, episode 2 of the Be Freaking Awesome podcast. Until next time, we hope you go out and be freaking awesome.